Welcome back. We now talk about chapter 3 of the book, Design Your Thinking, and the chapter is titled as Key Tenets of Design Thinking or the Key Principles of Design Thinking. So here I talk about a bunch of principles which can be very useful to you when you're trying to have your own design thinking expedition. The first principle is that you have to bring human to the center of your work. And as I've given the example previously with this marker, okay, it's very critical that you are for a moment not thinking about the product so much or the profits or what the competition is doing, etc. It is very critical to be totally honest to your customers. Now the thing is that when we talk about, and once again I would not limit it to customers as much as to humans, because I think one of the classic mistakes people do about design thinking is that they think it is about customer centricity. And when you're looking at the customer, you tend to discount a whole host of other variables which are non-customers. But I think it's a good idea to think of humans in general. And that would mean that you're talking about your stakeholders, which is your employees, your suppliers, your community where you're working, the other people who might be impacted or impacting your operation. So I think that is very critical. And a good example that I have for you is how Amazon has really become a very, very customer-centric and human-centric organization on top of it, because when they're using so much of automation on their warehouses, they are taking away the labor-intensive, repetitive, mindless work from people and giving them something which is more worthy of their talent. So from an employee perspective, they have used extensive amount of automation in their warehouses. And from a customer perspective, I have been a customer of Amazon for a very long time, and I find that company to be very, very customer centric, where they call you back immediately if you have raised for a request. They ensure that there is a no questions asked, product returns, replacement, etc. So I think even their website and their app is super effective. So that is where human centricity pays. And once you are human centric, over a period of time, I think you would start turning things around. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Okay, that's the first principle. The second principle is that design thinking is not about designing, it's about thinking. And a lot of people get entangled with respect to designing a product, okay, features and some clever contraptions, etc. But I think if we take a step back, we are talking about thinking through the problem like a knife through the butter. An example that I have of a product which was designed well, but it never thought from a customer perspective, which is thinking did not take precedence over designing, is Tata Nano. Now Tata Nano no doubt is an example of great engineering marvel. You could finally put a product for about ₹1,00,000 in terms of its cost of production, which is quite significant in inflationary market. But I think the product still failed quite miserably in the marketplace because it did not resonate with the customer. A car for any Indian or for most people across the world is a product of aspirational value, and nobody is going to go about claiming that I have bought the world's cheapest car. So I think the dissonance in the way the product was positioned is something which has really done a lot of disservice to Tata Nano. And I think that is where the design took precedence over thinking. Another critical aspect of the tenet of design thinking is focus on the subject and not the object, which is nothing but saying that it so happens often that we are so wounded up into the product specifications to make it amazingly feature rich. And a good example is your VCR remote. VCR remotes are examples where you have tried to put everything possible, but you have not really thought through about the subject. And in the book I give the example of the GE CT scan, the range of CT scans that GE has, which are predominantly the Adventure series, which is predominantly designed keeping in mind the toddlers and the infant customers and the children, because taking a child through the CT scan is non-trivial. Now how do you make this entire thing more fun-like for you to be able to go ahead and experience it firsthand? That is quite incredible. And as I said before, another critical thing is solve the problem with the customer and not for the customer, which means that at every step You have to sort of talk to the customer if it makes sense or not. And in the book, I give the example of the mirror box experiment of V.S. Ramachandran for the amputee limbs. So you can look at this example. It's a very brilliant case study of how you have solved a very complex problem in science, medical science, with the help of the customer. Think beyond products, which is that you have to really think with respect to the overall experience of the customer. And a very good example in this is Maruti Suzuki. Now, Maruti Suzuki has a lion's share in India. At one point of time, at the time of writing the book, they had a share of about 54%, which has now come down to shade over 40% now, but still pretty big for a auto company. And the reason why Maruti enjoys such a massive market share in India is not because of the product alone. Of course, they have good quality product, but that's not the product that does the trick. It's the paraphernalia around the product. The driving school, the Maruti True Value, the insurance, genuine accessories, on-road services, etc. So when all these things come together is when Maruti gets that massive market share. It's not just product, it's what's happening around the product. So to look at something which is very broad than the object per se. Now, the holy grails or the cornerstone of design thinking is how do you strike the balance between human desirability, technical feasibility, and business viability. And I think that is the centerpiece of design thinking, because it's very easy to get carried away by an idea which is highly desirable to the human in question. And once again, it's a human and not the customer, in human in question. But then it's equally important for you to balance it up with what is technically feasible and what is business-wise viable, which means that while you think customer loves it, you must also ascertain that you can do it with your technical competencies, and at the same time you should be able to get a business sense going. So that's a very critical aspect of design thinking. Think broad before you go narrow. So a way of looking at design thinking is what many people call as a double diamond model. So you first of all do divergent thinking and then you converge, and then again you go divergent and then you converge. So instead of going from one problem to one solution straight away, which involves no particular creative thinking, it's about bringing a solution from your repository. It's more like a pattern mapping than creating a new solution. What design thinking emphasizes upon is that you have to really think of multiple possibilities and park your judgment temporarily. Because if you're too judgmental, obviously you will not entertain many ideas. You will go with the most time-tested, proven solution, which isn't a pretty thing. So you really go diverge and then you converge. So you go diverge to understand the problem, then you converge to identify the key root cause. Then again you diverge to generate multiple possibilities, then you converge to come up with that one right solution. The divergent thinking and convergent thinking in succession is very critical for design thinking. And as I said before, divergent thinking is much more difficult to come as against convergent thinking. Which also means that you have to learn to compartmentalize your thinking. Okay. Compartmentalization of thinking means that when you are trying to solve a problem, you have to really be disciplined with respect to how you go about the entire process. So for instance, when I am looking at understanding the problem, I should not be entertaining any ideas. Because the thing is that the moment you start solving the problem, you have stopped understanding the problem. And it might so happen, and it does so happen, is that you have started solving the problem premature. You have not thought through the entire thing and you have straight away jumped into solving it, which isn't good. And at the same time, when you are trying to generate solutions, don't try to shortlist the best solutions, which is again a challenge that many people face, is that when you're trying to really go about generating ideas, you just can't but think of validating those ideas. This is good, this is not so good, etc., which is not really required. Allow all the ideas to come in, and then in the last stage you do the solution vegetation, which is about validating those ideas which make sense. Okay. Another critical thing is that we have to think about the root cause of the situation and not remain at the level of symptom. I've always been of the opinion that whenever people tell their problems to you, think of these as mere symptoms. Like when you go to the doctor, you never tell your problem, you're telling your symptoms. Even if the doctor asks you what's your problem, but you still shy away from telling the problem because frankly you do not know what's your problem. And how mistaken would it be that you straight away think of the symptom as the problem and start attacking it to no avail. So I think instead of having a symptomatic approach. You need to have an approach which is more anchored on the problem. So you have to really take that effort to go from symptoms to problems to the root causes, and then possibly solving those root causes. It's about what less and not what else. If I have to leave an engineer run amok, he or she would try to add as much as possible as technically, and thereby making the products more and more complex. And the example which I often give is that of a VCR or a VCP remote, which adds at least 40 plus buttons, most of them not really useful. People didn't use it. And if you compare that with the Amazon Fire TV Stick remote, you would realize that it has fewer buttons, but it pretty much meets all the necessities. So instead of thinking about what else can I do, which is adding and making things more layered and more complex, it's a good thing to simplify. And that is where design thinking is about minimalistic design. And not just minimalistic in terms of physical attributes, but also minimalistic in terms of how do we bring that to services. Minimalism is very critical. Yeah, sell the problem before you are selling the solution. Now, it's often a misbelief that whenever I'm trying to communicate a problem or to the customer knows what the problem is. Not necessary. Customer has so many other issues going in the background. Why will the customer bother about your problem? So we have this tendency of straight away jumping to the solution. Here is the solution. No, don't sell the solution. Sell the problem. And don't just sell the problem to the customer. Sell the problem also to your seniors. And there is no point in solving a problem that people don't consider as vital. So I guess it is very critical that you are able to sell the problem. So push the problem and let the customer pull the solution from you. Think with your hands. Now, human hand and human brain co-evolved. So when I'm using my hands, I'm also trying to use my brain, the both half of the brain, in a much more effective manner. But most people don't try to think with their hands. They would rather outsource the dirty work or the manual work to other people and do the more intellectual stuff. But I guess your intellect needs a validation, your intellect needs an anchoring. So thinking with your hands means getting your hands dirty. And we Indians have this tendency of, instead of thinking with our hands, we tend to think with our mouth. So whenever there is a problem that pops up, we tend to talk about it quite a lot instead of trying to put it down, write it down. So it's next time when you're facing a problem, write it down. It really makes a lot of sense, which also goes hand in hand with visualizing your thinking. Another word for design thinking is visual thinking. If you go to any design thinking workshop, and I'll share a few videos of my own workshops here. If you go to any design thinking workshop, you will realize that a lot of, action happens when people are presenting their ideas in the open in the form of a physical manifestation. It could be a sketch, drawing, a doodle, 3D architecture. When you're visualizing your thinking, it not only helps you think more clearly, but it also helps others understand what you're thinking. And this really helps collaboration. Fail often to succeed sooner. So as we go about design thinking, you see there is this iterative loop, and there is a lot of emphasis on both prototyping and empathizing. And especially prototyping is very vital here, because you are trying to pack as many hits or as many trials in given dollar and given time as you possibly can, so that you fail multiple times before you are going to the market. Now this book is an example of that. When I take my book to my fellow authors or to my well-wishers or to my editors and the editorial team at Penguin, they butcher it. And I would rather be happy with that butchering and that correction rather than it going to the market and the customers, which is you butchering it up. And that is a mark of humility, that it's okay. Anyways, I'm not a great writer. So if I have written something which only I can understand and my customers do not understand, it's a high time that I change it. And that requires humility, I guess, but it also requires discipline. So if you can accelerate failure, advance failure, and you can fail at a low cost rather than blowing it up in a big fashion publicly, that is what is the important principle of design thinking. So this is it with respect to the principles of design thinking. That's what chapter number 3. We'll shortly get into chapter number 4, where we talk about the first step of design thinking, which is inspire. I hope this entire edition is useful to you and the associated material. I also hope that this encourages you to really go and pick the book, but more importantly, apply the learning. So I hope this was useful. Thank you so much.